Cool, we're recording.
Hello, and welcome to the SIG-cluster-lifecycle meeting for Tuesday, the 10th of October, 2017. Today, we're going to start, or please add yourself to the attendee list. Right now, only Jamie's on there. And Jamie, coincidentally, has the first item as well. Why don't you kick us off, Jamie?
Yep. Okay. So this wasn't actually my pull request, but I think Davenham, he submitted a pull request to sort of extract all of the kube ADM code into staging. And I know that we had discussed it a few months ago on a prior release planning. And so I was under the assumption that we were sort of one release behind kubectl because we wanted to see how they would handle like all the sort of affiliated like dependencies and CI and stuff like that. So yeah, we have a pull request right now. I'm not sure that it's passing. So do you want to take over here?
Hi, my name is nickname is Dims. Hello to everyone. So I was chasing something else, and I noticed that we had a Git repository for kubeadm with issues, but the code was here. Then I was looking at whether we could kind of like stage it out just like the other repositories that we are pulling out of the main repository. And that kind of worked out fine. So the pull request itself is passing all the tests except for the kubeadm GC test. And that is because that test is failing for everything. Both the CI and the pull Kubernetes E2E kubeadm GC, both tests are failing for all jobs, not just my job. And I did dig into that one a little bit this morning, and it seems to be because of CNI not getting initialized. I haven't been able to drill down more than that because there are no kubelet logs available on this job. So I was waiting for somebody to show up in SIG testing, or somebody here, if they can pull out the logs, we can take a look at that. Essentially, it's read across the board for both the CI and the pull jobs.
So in terms of moving our code out, I linked to the doc that Jacob wrote a little while back called Extracting kubeadmin, where we discussed sort of the rationale for waiting. I mean, I think that technically we could take the code out now. Like there are no dependencies, I think, that would break. It's more of a process issue where there are lots of, right now, since we're in the main repo, we get built as part of the official releases. We are tracked as part of the official releases. They block the releases on making sure our tests are passing, et cetera. And as part of extracting kubectl out of the main repo, we expect them to solve a number of process issues around code being spread across multiple repos, which we didn't want to deal with. Like we wanted to focus on actually writing code and building product instead of the process around how to manage code across multiple repositories. And let someone else solve that problem first. So that's why the plan right now is to wait until kubectl comes out and then move out the release following there. So you can take a look at Jacob's doc with sort of the rationale and the plan. And if you think, one second, Tim, I would say if you think that we should be doing it a different way, please comment on that doc and propose a different path forward.
For what it's worth, I have no desire to go to staging if we can avoid it and just do a rip where possible. The staging repository is solely for my understanding is solely for the purpose of having the ability to mirror out to those separate repositories and not necessarily for any other purpose. So if it's possible to have in a release cycle for us to rip the Band-Aid off and not go through this rigmarole, because it makes it very difficult to tell people where the code actually lives and to understand what they're fixing anymore. I don't know if I've been in this project since Epoch, and the process of how things shifted and moved into that repository was very ad hoc and very difficult to follow. And only a couple of people in SIG API machinery actually knew what the demarcation lines were. And that became actually a pinch point for having a lot of issues. So if it's possible to circumvent that and avoid it entirely, I would vote to avoid.
The idea here was we can move it to staging and let it live in staging, and we can choose not to mirror also if that's of concern. But anyway, it was an experiment. It's up to you all to figure out what you want to do with it. And as far as I'm concerned, I was able to pull that off in the sense that all the tests are running and things are building, and seems like we have a good separation and it's easy to do it whenever we want to do it. So that's my feedback.
Yeah, I will also mention that it was always intended to be isolated code and not tightly tied to the rest of Kubernetes to make the extraction very easily. So I'm glad that that still seems to be mostly the case. There were a couple of things that Jacob had put in the doc about actually modifying the build rules to prevent people from making changes to the main repo that added sort of spaghettiness between kubeadmin and the rest of the code, which I think a little bit of that is starting to creep in a little bit, like kubefed is starting to import some of our constants. So I think
it's always around constants.
Yeah, exactly. So to say, if you did want to help sort of push the process forward of extracting, it might be useful to take some of those actions of making sure we fully isolate our code in the main repo, so that when we are ready to move it out, sort of process-wise, it's a very simple pull request to scoot it over. And we can staging repo and go straight to our own repo, as Tim was saying.
Right. I have another PR which does exactly that, which essentially decouples the package from the CMD /. So yeah, we are covered there.
Cool. Thanks.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Can I just, is there any plan to get rid of staging for the existing like API machinery and stuff?
Long term, yes, but that long term is I don't know how many releases that is.
Well, I think it's like the famous quote, right? Like in the long term, we're all dead, right? I think.
Right.
Well, originally, so this you'd have to go to the API machinery call to understand how many different repositories they're planning to split up. Because originally it was 3, now I think it's like 9 or 10, and I'd follow the logic anymore. Only Daniel, Stefan, David Eads are pretty much the source of truth on
maybe
the source of truth.
I think it's like military bidding. You start off with like 3 billion, and then you're like, you know, it's always 10 billion. Everyone knows it's 10 billion, but you say 3 billion because that can get passed. But everyone knows it's 10. But yeah, that is okay. Yeah, that's true. It's going to get worse before it gets better, I guess. So,
can someone point me where is the staging repo that we're talking about? I don't see it.
It's inside the main repository. It's just the staging directory.
It's a directory called staging, yeah.
So it's a way to do multiple repos in one repo. You just put them in a different directory.
Oh, this is terrible.
Yes.
Submodules for people that don't understand Git submodules.
Okay, let's be honest. Nobody understands Git submodules. It's always pain.
I am happy to give a brown bag on Git submodules, but yes, I can give you enough to get it working. But it is at least as good, at least as bad as the current mirror script.
All I know is every time I do something with Git submodules, there's like 3 or 4 commands that all sound like they do the same thing, and I just bang on them until things seem to work.
That is fair. It is also getting better. It's better than it used to be.
The one difference between what's there now and Git submodules is right now, if you want to modify the code, you modify it in the staging directory, and the mirror happens out. So you can make one PR that changes like something in the staging directory and something that depends on it in a single PR, instead of having to do the thing we'll have to do once it is actually in its own repo. I think the proposal was that at some point that mirroring changes and happens the other way. I'm not really sure.
I mean, I think that it imposes I don't know, yeah, the idea of it being in 2 repos and it being 2 separate commits does impose like the idea that maybe, you know, you shouldn't have to make a commit in both, and if you're doing it in both, there's something that's a big red flag that something is going wrong. But I mean, I think just on the idea of separating it out or even putting it into the staging repo, like it would make it easier for cops to consume, for example. But I think that if it can be isolated to a small set of packages that have isolation enforced with Bazel or Basel rules, then that is also a good step forward.
All right. Well, I think the TLDR here is the API machinery folks are pretty much the only people that know how the multiple repo split is happening, proceeding, and where it's headed. So if people are interested in helping push that along, they should chat with the folks in the API machinery SIG. And I think the consensus that I'm hearing from people on this call is that we don't want to get embroiled in that and get distracted. And I think that's what Jacob's proposal basically was, is wait until they've figured it out, and then we'll follow in their footsteps with a nice, well-trodden path, while trying to isolate ourselves as much as possible in the meantime. All right, so let's see. I'm going to switch the next two agenda items quickly because I asked Mike Janice to join the call to discuss what was formerly the second one. So Jamie, the next one you have is whether kubadmin should try detecting host names for use in SANs.
Which one is this? Okay, right, yeah. So I think so. We had an issue that was posted, I think, a few weeks ago, where somebody asked whether sort of kubadmin could try and detect the master host name and insert it as a SAN for the TLS creds. And a bunch of us sort of commented on that issue, saying that it's kind of tricky to do, and it's quite difficult to extract like a fully qualified domain name to put into a cert. But there could be a way that we could do it to try and improve the UX there in terms of that init operation. So I just kind of wanted to sort of canvas feedback here on what people think is the best idea, whether we should try and sort of, somebody sort of hypothesized that we could try and use the host name and try and resolve it using DNS. And if it doesn't resolve, exclude it and don't even bother. But yeah, I know that for like Rackspace service, for example, the host name is like an opaque string. It doesn't really mean anything. So yeah, I didn't really know what people thought.
Can't you already specify a config variable?
Yeah, yeah.
Config?
So you can append SANs into the TLS, but I think people were just kind of, I think their argument is that why don't we make like an assumption? Why doesn't kubadmin make a sane assumption and then insert it without people having to append? I mean, I personally don't have a problem with the additional flag. It's just that they thought that kubadmin was in a position to predict the host name.
They could always script generate the config.
I guess that's a good question. Is kubadmin in a position to make a sane choice there, or is it just going to add something add a SAN to the cert that makes no sense in many situations?
Right. I think the only way it could do it is to try and extract the host name and do a DNS trace on it or something like and like if it passes, then append it. But yeah, it kind of feels messy to me. It doesn't feel like a good way of doing it.
My overall opinion is when it comes to sort of things in certificates, try to be at least magic as possible.
Right.
Yeah, I tend to lean in that direction too. And as Tim said, if there's a specific deployment that knows that you can do that, it's pretty easy to wrap a simple script around kubadmin to add that flag or to generate the config that you pass to it.
Okay.
So, one thing that would be useful for us to document is, let's say you bring up a cluster and you're like, oh crap, now I need to add a SAN, right? How do you actually do the cert rotation for that leaf cert for the API server to actually add a SAN? Because I think that's probably a fairly common thing of like, oh, I didn't realize I wanted to reach it through this name. Let me add something to it, and you don't have to rebuild the cluster.
Yes.
There's sort of a category of things like that where you want to upgrade a cluster without changing the version. You want to sort of reconfigure it. We don't handle that right now.
No. Yeah, I think there's a lot of use cases that kind of fall in like a documentation content gap right now. People aren't really sure how to do them. So if we can start like collecting these things, like common use cases, that like appending a SAN post in it, that would be pretty cool. I'm not sure where that would live though, because I think like the only kubadmin docs we have right now are to do with like installation and setup. And like we have that kubadmin init page, which just contains like literally everything to do with so like trying to break that up into discrete sections would be really cool, I think, or discrete pages.
Fabrizio actually has another thing on the agenda about that exact topic. So.
Cool. Okay, so I'll respond on that issue, saying that we think the flag is enough.
Excellent. And with that, we'll actually segue into Fabrizio's topic. When he said he wasn't sure if he'd be able to make it today, but he did put forward a design for improving our docs, which is right along the lines of with what Jamie was just saying. So I think, Jamie, you should definitely take a look at this. Other folks that are interested in making our docs better should also take a look at this. This is awesome that Fabrizio is driving this forward, because docs is generally a sort of underloved part of the project. And we really appreciate people, thinking about docs and trying to make them better. it is sort of one of the main touch points for users, right? Users will run a command, and then when it doesn't do what they expect, they'll go look at docs. And so this is just as much a part of the user experience as actually the code that's executing. Let's see, I don't think Fabrizio is here. So does anybody else have context on this doc, or should we put it on the agenda for next week and let people take a look at it?
Actually, so I looked at that doc earlier. One thing which Fabrizio mentioned is that a potential format for our man docs could be similar to how kubectl does it. And so they have like a flashy kind of GUI kind of thing. And so I didn't know whether that would be suitable for us because we don't actually have that many config options compared to kubectl. So yeah, that's something we need to think about too, like whether minimal is better or whether we want, all the things in the UI. Because I don't think any other component, in the reference docs, no other component except kubectl has that. So yeah, it's just another thing we need to think about.
I mean, pretty much none of the other components are meant to be executed directly by people, though, right? So I think in that sense that kubeadmin is similarly aligned with kubectl in the sense that we expect in some cases, a human operator to be executing these commands and needing to have that context and that help. Whereas you don't really expect a human operator to execute the API server binary. All right, I'm hearing a lot of silence about the docs, so maybe we'll just move on to the next agenda.
And silence is, at least in my case, reading through this doc. It looks great, so I would love to engage with Fabrizio when he's around. So
cool. All right. Diego, do you want to give an update on the rolling update strategy?
Yes. It's not exactly a happy update. So, like we agreed, I kind of tried to push this forward so we could get the design discussion closed and then actually finish the implementation and get this feature in 1.9 as quickly as possible so that, testing could proceed with self-hosted upgrades and with kubeadm. So kind of the main issue that seemed was open was this host port handling, how that would be done with the new update strategy. And so it suggested that I go to SIG-apps. So I went to SIG-apps. I put together a doc suggesting 2 different ways that we could possibly handle it. I asked them for comments a couple times. And then in the meeting yesterday, no one really had looked at the document except for you, Robert. And I got even more kind of just pushback. It felt like kind of people were finding new reasons to try to shut this proposal down a bit. A lot of people saying, well, we need more use cases was one big criticism for adding this. Another is, well, the apps API is going to 1.0 soon, so we shouldn't change it before that. That we should go through an alpha beta stable kind of feature gate. And then a few concerns around scheduling unification and that we should talk to SIG scheduler to see what their plans are in the next year and see how to make sure that our changes are going to be compatible with their plans and so on. So it seemed like we kind of maybe increased the number of blockers rather than decreased as a result of this so far. I think the next step that was proposed was actually now just to go to SIG scheduler. So we've actually increased the number of blockers rather than decreased, unfortunately.
Well, I can help you out there. There is no plan, at least in the short term, to convert daemon sets into schedulable items. We've talked about it many times, but there's no one it's not a higher priority item that we've planned on dealing with in the near term. We've discussed it many times, but there's always been a resource problem and other priorities, namely priority preemption has been a big issue that we've had to deal with and will affect this SIG as well. So as we start to roll out elements, we should start to add priority fields once we go to beta. But other than that, the there is no plan to do the swap. Another comment I wanted to make is a lot of new additions go through alpha beta stages even for fields and do field level versioning. I don't understand why this would be a case for that field level versioning and modify the documents to basically say this is an alpha field and primarily for a specific use case.
Okay, that's helpful, and I think makes sense. But just more from a tactical side, I think there's just a lot of kind of people who are concerned, about all these aspects. So, and
could you elaborate who the people are? Just out of
I don't know everyone exactly, so I have to kind of go back through.
If it's recorded and if it was the last meeting, I can just go to that recording. That'll be fine.
Yeah,
too.
in the last meeting, it was mostly ONSK was the person who spoke up a bit, and then I think the other people who have been concerned have commented on the design doc PR, which is linked from the agenda notes. Okay. A bunch of people in there, and I think, yeah. So going back to tactics, it's been hard to say, well, what precisely would you like for us to move past this? And I don't know. I guess I don't know if anyone else was on the meeting yesterday, but it's been hard to get kind of hard answers on that to actually just resolve things and unblock. So the long short of it is I here at CoreWest, I don't really have a lot of bandwidth to, nor do I think the right kind of position in the community to really resolve this on my own. And so this is a really important feature to get in for 1.9 for sure. I'm going to have to humbly request some help to push through some of these more kind of getting people on the same page kind of effort.
So I'll say two things. One, I'm happy to go talk to Kenneth Owens and try to get more context from our side. And Clayton also mentioned in chat, and it looks like he's on the meeting today, that he had a couple questions in the doc and was looking for some more context. I don't know.
Yeah, I just didn't, and this doesn't have to happen here. I just wanted to figure out, can we omit host path completely from the pod definition and come up with something that gets us to the next gate without having that?
You mean host ports?
Yeah, because the host port isn't required to actually bind. It's just required to schedule and to get exclusion, and also for some network providers to do that. So I just didn't. I wanted to get more context. I can take that up. We can talk later, but I'd be happy to help because this also comes up for other cases that SIG apps does care about. So I just want to. I want to dig a little bit more on that.
Sorry, Clayton. Other cases meaning other use cases, because I think that's another thing that the SIG apps was kind of pushing us for in order to even get this feature.
Yeah, it was more bootstrapping. Like if you want to bootstrap a CNI plugin, you're not going to be able to use host port to get it from a CNI plugin that's not running yet. So that was the question I had asked in the doc, but I wanted to explore a little bit why the host port was absolutely required versus us potentially kicking us up a level and saying, if you want to be a bootstrappable network provider, you must do this, this, and this so that bootstrapping can consume you or expose you.
Okay.
Do we need the host port part to work for our use cases for cluster lifecycle?
Well, okay, sorry. So I was going to say,
that
was the question I was trying to ask.
I don't think
I don't know
did,
anything
right?
that's using host port these days.
Yeah, this
it's either host networking or node port at this point, but very few things that I know have used host port.
Right.
And if you specify a port on your pod and specify host networking, it will treat it as a host port. But if you omit the port, you can still build a service from it. So I just didn't know what the gap was. Like maybe there was were you relying on this so that the network provider would do something?
No, I mean, for context, this was actually just kind of from SIG apps, people reviewing the design doc. It was something they called out as something that specifically needed to be handled, and mostly from a UX perspective, kind of. We need to handle this. We need to have a good story around it for users, and so that it'll have at least some sort of parity with how host ports can be used with the other strategy, basically.
Right. I just didn't know whether that was blocking, because if you drop the port from the pod definition, you can still create services to it. You can still bind to host network and expose a host port. You just have to do a little bit more work on your own.
Right.
And then you can get the double daemon set scheduling with
yeah.
And that's basically the first proposal in the doc is like have it if it's explicitly going to conflict, we reject it out of hand. And if people need to work around that, then they have ways to do that, but they have to modify their code. I think that's okay. I'm not sure why we're trying to make the system so smart here and just instead of just telling users, sorry, that doesn't work. Especially if it's not needed for the one use case we have a strong reason to put this feature in for.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah, and I'm not a networking stack expert by any means, so I was leaning heavily on my colleague Casey on that side of things. So sorry, Clayton, for not answering your questions directly because I don't actually.
No, it's fine. Maybe we can circle back in the meeting room later, or in chat or something later today. I just want to, if there's something we can get around and recommend, because like it is valuable for bootstrapping to be able to do host networking to build services, and so there probably is a case there. It's just like I think the SIG apps definitely had that. This is like the new strategy is a very big new thing versus the might be something to be considered in 110, and if there's a smaller thing that we can do to get over the hump.
Is there any reason why we can't mark? It's an existing field, right? With a new, we don't actually have a good versioning policy, I'd say, even for fields themselves. But to add modifications to enumerations to fields, do we even have a formalized policy in API machinery to add these things? Because we want to mark it as alpha, right?
Adding a new enumeration to alpha is actually very scary. That's the one that we probably can't do because you can't help but get exposed to it if someone turns it on. But again, an alpha feature behind a gate, it would probably be okay. So, I mean, really everything now is just it has to be behind a gate. And if you turn the gate on, we will break you when we change that. Like you don't get any guarantees for alpha.
That seems totally reasonable. Despite the fact that I hate feature gates, but.
I think everybody hates feature gates because you can't use the feature.
Yep.
So I'll follow up in chat later and just see if I can tease apart some of the other bits that we might be able to simplify some of the requirements now.
Okay. Yeah, and I just shot Owen and Kenneth Owens an email to try and sync up with him offline too.
Okay. So I guess in terms of near term, like what can we do next week? I don't know if maybe Robert or others have thoughts. Like, is my doc kind of missing the mark on some level, or is there another way I should try to approach SIG apps or other folks? I don't personally have a clear next step.
This is a meta problem where we as a community need to do a better job of helping to shepherd things through. Like there needs to be a wise Sherpa who kind of guides you along the way instead of kind of like says, go forth in the wilderness and make goodness, because sometimes the process is not clear. I don't know, we haven't really assigned a quote unquote Sherpa for this, for lack of a better words, or shepherd. But I do think something like this is required to make it go through, and whether people have thoughts or have bandwidth or there, so.
Yeah. Maybe we could go back to the kind of the design proposal PR, and if we can perhaps figure out who are the kind of people that need to approve this, and then what are the improvements we need to make, if that's alpha gating, if that's getting more use cases to justify this feature, if that's coming up with some short and long-term plan for host ports, at least enumerate those, and then we can resolve them, and then we can close the design doc, and then I can finish the implementation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental argument from SIG apps was if you don't want host ports to conflict, don't declare them. And everything should still work. You just don't get magic network host port exposure. That may just be a problem with networking. So there's another angle there, which is the networking SIG probably should, I think it's kind of unreasonable that, I think you're right, exclusionary behavior there, but you're already going to have to wait for all the networking plugins to change, even if we change the behavior of that for the exclusion stuff, because they'd still have to respect it. So there's some level of just, in the short term for the use case, working around it and getting this queued up for, because I don't think SIG apps was objecting to this in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what to tell you about next steps. Like I said, I'll try to circle around with Kenneth and Clayton's going to start a conversation, I think, in Slack later, and we'll try to figure out the best path forward here. I mean, I guess I'm hoping that there's a path that doesn't involve coordination between us, SIG apps, and SIG networking, because it seems like that's going to be really slow.
Yeah. Well,
it'd be nice if we could make some progress to unblock our use case while we discuss like the perfect solution that we can pivot towards later.
Right. Okay. Sounds good. Just wanted to give everyone an update.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So next on the agenda is stripping tokens from kubeadmin config. So it looks like there's a PR that hasn't merged yet with a cherry pick and a release note targeted for 181, which I think is going to be cut early next week. Matt, do you want to talk about that?
Sure, I gotta find my unmute. Yeah, so this was sort of an oversight in 180. We started uploading that config map with the kubeadium configuration. One item in that configuration was the initial token, like the default token when you do init. This is, I mean, we were sort of lucky that we dropped the default TTL from infinite down to 24 hours. So out of the, on most installations, this is actually not a huge deal at all. But Fabrizio did a PR to strip that token value out of the uploaded configuration. That also applies on upgrade. So when you upgrade from 180 to 181, it will get sanitized. I think technically this also, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but this also happens if you install a 1.7 cluster using kubeadium 1.8. Joe, do you know?
I think it'll probably upload the cluster info also. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how
basically it's a bug in kubeadium 1.8, not in Kubernetes 1.8.
Yeah.
So there's an open PR. There's also an open cherry pick onto release 1.8, which is slated to get tagged tomorrow. So we need to get that merged quick.
Wait, 181 is slated to get built and tagged tomorrow?
That's what I saw in an email.
Who's the release manager?
Joe.
I need to book him then. Sorry, there's another thing that's on the list I need to do today now.
Anyway, if you want to take a look, there's in the kubeadium issue 485, there's that proposed kind of known issues note for the release notes. I don't want to alarm. I don't want to be alarmist. Like, I don't think this is a huge deal, but I think it's something that you might want to know about if you install the 1.80 cluster.
Yeah, Joe sent out an email recently about 181 with sort of the proposed release notes. I don't know if you saw that, Tim.
I'm drowning in email trying to get back up after I've finished another release, so I should probably be caught up by the end of this week.
Okay. He says that 18 hours ago, you might just search for it because it has a bunch of pending PRs on there also for 1.8, which have, I guess, not been cherry picked yet, but maybe are planned. Yeah, so he's asking you to tag him on the issue or hit him up on Slack. So yeah, please follow up. Great. So next was a question about integrating kubeadmin and kubebench. Kubebench is basically an analysis tool for Kubernetes clusters to tell you if they're configured securely. And I think Lucas was proposing we run something akin to that or that exactly. I can't tell if he's proposing on our CI tests or on released versions. But it looks like Liz is on the call from the kubebench team.
Yeah, hi. Unfortunately, Lucas doesn't appear to be on the call, so which would be. But I thought since I've joined, I may as well raise the topic. So Kubebench is currently not part of the Kubernetes project, although we're totally open to trying to figure out how to make that happen. We'd be, there's whatever processes need to happen to make that happen, and we haven't done that yet. But I guess setting that aside, Lucas had said it would be good to find some way of integrating it into the kubeadm automated tests. We're totally open to that. I don't know what it would require. I think that's probably all I can say at this point, but I guess I just wanted to at least say that we're open to that, very much so.
Can you give a short spiel about sort of what Kubench looks for and how it runs inside of a cluster?
Yeah, sure. So the Kubench is based on the specifications that get published by the Center for Internet Security. And they're kind of divided into sections for tests that you would run on a master or a worker node, federated node, what have you. And each test tends to be of the form, find the running executable by running PS and look for a particular parameter and check that it is set up in a, it's there or it's not there, or it's true or it's false, or that this value doesn't conflict with that value. There's probably, it's about a 200-page spec, so there's a ton of tests. You basically just, it's a Go application. We've got it packaged up as a container, so it's easy to install. And the tests are configured as YAML files. And you just basically run kubeadm master or kubeadm node, depending on what kind of node you're on, and you get a list of pass, fail, possibly information if there's no clear-cut result, and a set of remedial steps that you could take to correct or to bring yourself in line with the CIS recommendations. So the nature of those tests is, sometimes people might have good reasons for not wanting to comply with all of those features, but in the absence of a good reason, they're probably wise security measures to take. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, and actually brought up another question in my mind, which is, have you heard about the effort that we're pushing for component configuration, which is basically removing all command line flags from binaries?
No, I haven't. That's going to set the cat amongst the pigeons for CIS. Okay.
Yeah, so we found over time that passing lots and lots of flags to binaries has made the system very difficult to configure consistently.
Okay.
So we're sort of moving configuration for each of the system components into what we call component configuration, which is configuration that lives inside of the Kubernetes system, generally in config maps. And so in 1.9, we're targeting the kubelet to use dynamic kubelet config, where the kubelet will start off with very minimal configuration and read the rest of its config from a config map. The kube proxy already does this. The scheduler is moving towards this direction. The auto scaling team is moving towards this direction. Fluentd is moving towards this direction. So we're sort of taking a lot of the system components that we run and trying to shift them so that they don't require a lot of command line flags. The upshot would be that now to sort of audit the system, instead of having to run something on every single node, we should generally be able to just run something centrally that talks to the API server and audits all of the configs for the system in one place. But you might want to start sort of following as each component pivots. You're going to see fewer and fewer command line flags if you run something on the master, for instance.
This answers some questions that were in my mind about what happened to some of the kube proxy configs that we had in previous versions of the spec. Okay.
Yes.
I don't suppose there's an easy place, like a link to some documentation about that, is there?
There is actually.
Mike's on the call. He has the meta document, I believe.
I got it open because I have to keep linking it to people.
Do we still also have the read-only, like, get the current component config of a running process?
I think it's under development. People on the call in the past have wanted that. The problem is we need to build a versioned a config Z, which is versioned. Right now the config Z isn't versioned, so it's not a stable ABI, and I would not recommend that anybody build tooling around it. But I think M. Toffin was working on it. He has a public design doc that he circulated about that. I could pull it up and paste it into the chat if you guys are interested.
Yeah, it's certainly not obvious to me which one would be more stable, like trying to infer it from the component config files or trying to like look at a non-versioned config Z, which may at some stage in the future be versioned?
I think right now, either of those, as we move forward, is going to be more stable than groveling around in sort of, say, like systemd unit files or doing ps and /proc and stuff like that.
Yes, definitely.
But at the same time, like this is definitely a valuable effort, and we shouldn't like say that like the means by which we get those flags might change over the next 6 months. But I think this is cool, and I'd love to see this I'd love to see this against COPS, and I think we should try to get this into all the E2E tests, like the cube up ones as well.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a lot easier to run once we have component config, right? Because then you can point it at any cluster and it'll give you a result, right, very easily.
Which sounds great. That sounds a lot easier to run. Yeah.
I saw also something clever that someone did was they made a log dumper in CubeUp run as a daemon set. I don't know if it's supposed to run updates or not, but it runs as a daemon set, and therefore can run on each node, and it does it in parallel, which is really sneaky. So it might be overkill for this case to test every node, but you never know, maybe one will be different.
Well, I think that's kind of exactly what you're looking for, is you want to make sure that you don't have one that is different, right?
Yeah, I guess it depends, like whether you're testing like your install script or like your cluster, but yes, yeah. There's no harm in it.
I think that sounds clever. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we're starting to run out of time all of a sudden. There's a couple of follow-ups we should do. This, like Justin was saying, it seems valuable to integrate with sort of any of our EDE testing, not just kubeadmin, but we got to start somewhere. So if Lucas is excited about getting this integrated, then maybe he can push there, or you should talk to Justin about trying to get it working with COPS, and we'll try to port it to the other ones as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to try running it manually against COPS and then get a better feel for what it would take to, to get it running automatically.
The low barrier to entry would be to tag it as feature enablement for your given set of end-to-end tests. And that way you can get into the main line and individual suites can selectively enable as needed.
Tim, can you add that comment into the meeting notes? Thanks. So next is a thing I've been punting off because I didn't realize Mike had joined the call, which is solutions for adding labels to newly joined nodes. So it looks like there's a feature request and there's an option to do this on the join command. So if you join, you could pass additional labels that we'd send to the API server. There's another issue about taints and node IPs. And there's a discussion in SIG-auth, which is part of the reason I looped Mike in, is he also has a proposal for how to sort of flip this on its head as we start to trust nodes less and gives nodes less scope in terms of centralizing things like setting labels and taints from the control plane and not from the nodes themselves. So I don't know, Mike, if you wanted to comment on either of these issues or talk about your proposal that you've put forward in SIG-auth.
Yeah. Essentially, there's our security issues that arise from allowing nodes to report their labels. This has come up, and other attributes about them, taints. This has come up when people have attempted to implement features that report kernel version, and it has come up when we have been working on auto provisioning the kubelet serving certificate, which is ongoing work by Jacob Simpson. I don't think any of these features can proceed with the current self-reporting mechanism. So my hope is that we can move label initialization and taint initialization and address initialization from the kubelet to a central controller that we can trust a little bit more. I don't know if it blocks anybody from using the kubelet label or kubelet taint flags. I think that eventually somebody will enable a central initializer for nodes, and those flags will just stop working. So I guess I expect that the implementation of your feature request would be to just plumb through the kubelet taint flag. Is that approximately correct?
So one of the problems is that kubeadmin doesn't actually set kubelet flags. So we assume the kubelet's already up and running. So that's maybe, I don't know how, do you know if that taint flag is reflected into the component config stuff that is centrally controlled? That seems a little bit bouncy. I'm not sure how that would work.
Yes, it will be.
That seems a little strange. So the kubelet comes up, joins, downloads the config, and then does it download the config before it registers itself as a node, or it creates the node?
I'm not sure what the ordering is exactly, but I expect that that's what the ordering is.
I know that it downloads the config and then restarts and reads the config.
Yeah. So one of the things that, like one of the things, if we do have a controller that's going to initialize nodes, it's going to have to know sort of, this node from that node based on some sort of flag, right? And the one thing that we have that's unique during this bootstrap process is like the bootstrap token, or at least with kubeadmin, the bootstrap token or the group that you're used to actually authenticate that stuff.
Yeah, so I would recommend reading the doc to get further detail, but it presumes the existence of a machine database and strong node identity when nodes join. So, for example, in AWS, if the node join procedure was gated on the node producing the VM identity doc, we have a pretty strong guarantee that of the identity of the node as it joins, and then the central controller can go look at the machine database, which is the EC2 API, verify the zone taints, verify hopefully maybe the OS image and version, which is different than today. So, for example, take the kernel version example that I mentioned earlier. Somebody wanted to report kernel version so that they could write a label or a selector on a replica set that would prevent their application from running on nodes with kernel versions that had known vulnerabilities. That doesn't make sense in the current model, and I think allowing people to try to build security conscious applications using these labels is fairly broken.
Yeah, no, the idea of a machine database and controlling that's definitely going to be something that will either be external, something like the API, the AWS API or what have you, or there'll be situations where some of that machine database will be, intrinsic to the cluster. So I could see that being, a config map or some config maps as part of the implementation that goes into this labeler. And so then the action for the user would be they do a kubeadmin init, and then they actually do it, kubeadmin or kube control, sort of like, add machine entry or something like that adds it to the database that's used.
So what client was kubeadmin join going to update the labels on the master with, or on the node with? So would it use the node's client to do this? Or had that not been thought through?
I don't think it's been thought through. So there's different characteristics which people have shown interest in to override. One of them is labels, another is taints, and another is the node IP. That's the flag sent into the kubelet. So I don't think we've gone as far as thinking about which clients would be necessary to do that, or indeed like whether we would need a client, whether we could just put it into component config or something like that.
Right. Yeah. The central controller model makes this a lot more secure. And those are the three things that we are working on removing from Node's ACL list: taints, labels, and IP addresses.
Can I ask, the alternative to a central controller that applies it is an admission controller or something that gates it, right? And it seems that we'll always have user level labels and taints, because users have a desire to segment their cluster into different types of machines, for example. So you will always have the ability you always need the ability to add your own labels. At some stage, you won't be able to add the protected labels.
Yes, this is specifically for nodes. So system node or system:/node:/host name. So these identities will no longer be able to set labels, IP addresses, or taints. And removing that ACL list would break the current kubelet flags. So a user would still be able to, if they had permission, go and update labels. The nodes couldn't self-report.
You want the node to come up as soon as possible with the correct labels and taints, right? You don't want a window.
Yeah, but you could, I mean, if you know the ID of the node, you can actually pre-populate your machine database. But the threat model here, Justin, just to be clear, is that if a machine gets popped, what you don't want it to do is start mucking with labels so that it can then steer work to it so that it can actually then compromise that.
Right, I mean, yeah, so we'll protect, yeah.
I mean, and you think about it, you're like, okay, that's kind of bad. And so what that means is that there cannot be credentials on the machine for setting node labels to some definition of node labels, whether it's protected or not. I mean, like, yeah, but the minute you have labels there, people start steering work on that, and then you're going to get in a bad scene, right?
The IP addresses are even worse. So IP addresses, I can report a service DNS name as an IP address and get a certificate signed by the certificate API if we have enabled the alpha feature of kubelets getting their serving certificates using the certificate APIs. So that cannot graduate to beta until we have a solution for this.
But at the same time, like, isn't that solution months, if not a year off?
Well, it depends on when somebody starts working on it. But yes, the attack. All right, so serving certificates are kubelet serving certificates are interesting. So right now we are in a situation where you can middleman if you have capnet admin on a host. You can middleman kube control execs, which is bad. Worse would be enabling this. I guess it's a question of priority. There are quite a few security holes in Kubernetes. We need to prioritize which ones we start patching. I'd be happy for somebody to start working on this. I don't think it is prioritized over other security features.
Mike, would you mind putting a link to that doc you mentioned into either the meeting notes or the comment section? That's all right?
Sure.
It does sound like in the meantime, if you pass kubelet flags, you can still set nodes and taints. And there's an issue with what starts what with kubeadmin for passing flags. And so,
right.
So I think the question that you had, Jamie, is if there's a way, presumably if we'd implement faster than sort of the proper way that Mike's describing for setting labels and taints, that we could do it through kubeadmin.
I think that taints are being locked down in 1.9.
So maybe it's not worth taking a parallel path then.
Yeah, I don't think it is, because it probably required a little bit of work on our part, and it doesn't really make sense if the mid-long term is going to be something completely different. Yeah, I'm kind of also interested in like this central controller, like how coupled it is to sort of an external cloud API, because if we're referencing like AWS or OpenStack APIs for metadata, then how's that going to work if I'm not integrated with cloud, right? So yeah, that was one I thought I had.
The doc mentions that the cloud controller manager is the obvious candidate to house such a controller.
We could put it into the Kubernetes API and call it the not nodes thing or something like that.
Oh, so the node restriction admission controller would be the admission controller that wipes these fields. Is that what you were?
No, I'm just saying what we're gonna end up putting it back into the Kubernetes API, and we're just gonna have the exact same problem, just a level deeper once removed.
Well, at least we can put the central controller in somewhere where we trust more deeply than where we run user workloads, which is the current method for locking down sensitive assets.
So I've had this exact use case at a bank where I had sort of high integrity workloads like accounting databases and low integrity workloads like internal Facebook app. I didn't want them to be co-located. So I had separate node pools with high integrity. So this was like our design proposal, our design plan for this, right? Low integrity worker pool, high integrity worker pool. But with the current system, there's no way to stop the low integrity worker pool from upgrading itself into a high integrity worker.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we have a minute left. I did want to make sure that that conversation got started, even if we can't finish it now. And the last thing on the agenda is that CI jobs are broken. I just tagged cluster lifecycle bugs on that issue because I'm not sure people had noticed yet. If anyone has some spare cycles to go take a look at that, it looks like the issue is asking for help in a couple of places. And with that, we are just about out of time, so I think we're going to call it. Thanks everyone for coming. There's another meeting at 10 for kubeadmin adoption, so if people are happy to hang around for that. Otherwise, we'll see people either tomorrow at the breakout meeting or next Tuesday. Thanks.
Thank you.